The gavel fell with the finality of a coffin nail. The sound echoed in the cavernous courtroom, a percussive punctuation mark at the end of Ilara Vance's life as she knew it. Years. For a crime she hadn't committed. Across the room, her boss, the charismatic and unimpeachable Julian Croft, wiped a single perfectly timed tear from his eye. He looked at her, a mask of profound sorrow etched onto his handsome face, a look that said, "I'm so sorry it had to be you." Ilara felt a cold, dead calm settle over her. The shock had burned itself out in the preceding weeks, leaving behind only the icy ash of betrayal. She had been Julian's protégé, the sharpest mind at Croft Enterprises, the one he trusted with the most sensitive accounts. She had idolized him, attributing her meteoric rise to his mentorship. In reality, she had been a tool, meticulously sharpened and positioned, not for success but for sacrifice. He had built a labyrinthine fraud scheme, a masterpiece of financial deception, and at its center, he had placed her. Every digital signature, every rerouted transfer, every falsified report bore her digital credentials, a breadcrumb trail leading directly to her desk and nowhere else. He had framed her with the same precision he applied to his business dealings. As the bailiffs led her away, her eyes locked with his one last time. The sorrow in his gaze was gone, replaced by something she had never seen before, the cool, reptilian glint of a predator who had just finished a meal. In that moment, the embers of her despair were fanned by a new, dark wind. It wasn't justice she would crave. It wasn't vindication. It was erasure. She would not just clear her name, she would obliterate his. Prison was a crucible. The first year was a blur of institutional gray, the clang of steel doors, and the crushing weight of lost time. She wept until her tear ducts ran dry, mourned the life that had been stolen, the future that had evaporated. But Ilara was a strategist at her core. Grief, she realized, was an unproductive emotion. It was a resource being squandered. She began to observe. The prison ecosystem was a microcosm of the corporate world she had left, but stripped of its polite veneer. There were hierarchies, alliances, currencies of information and favor. And there were teachers if you knew where to look. Her first mentor was a woman named Maria, serving life for killing her abusive husband. Maria taught her about resilience, about bending without breaking, about turning pain into a shield. "They took your life," Maria told her, her voice a gravelly whisper in the noisy cafeteria. "Don't let them take your mind, too. That's the one thing you still own." Her second was a former hacktivist who went by the name Mouse. A pale, twitchy woman with eyes that seemed to see the world in lines of code. Mouse was in for dismantling the internal servers of a predatory lending company. For a carton of cigarettes a week, she taught Ilara everything she knew. They started with theory, scribbling on contraband napkins. Encryption, social engineering, dark web navigation, ghosting a digital footprint. Ilara, with her background in complex financial systems, absorbed it all like a sponge. The abstract world of high finance and the grimy underworld of black hat hacking were two sides of the same coin, systems waiting to be exploited. Her third teacher was a woman they called the Duchess, an elegant silver-haired inmate who was once a titan of Wall Street, brought down by an affair that turned into an insider trading scandal. The Duchess taught Ilara the art of psychological warfare. "Men like Julian Croft," she'd say, her voice a low purr during their walks in the yard, "are not brought down by brute force. Their egos are their load-bearing walls. You don't demolish the building, dear. You introduce termites." The Duchess taught her how to read people, to identify their vanities, their fears, their secret levers of shame and desire. For 10 years, Ilara Vance ceased to exist. In her place, a new entity was forged. She read law books until she could cite precedent. She studied market trends through week-old newspapers. She learned from Mouse how to build an identity from scratch and from the Duchess how to wear it like a second skin. The fire of her rage had not cooled. It had been compressed into a diamond-hard point of purpose. Forgiveness was a currency she didn't possess. Revenge was the only asset she had left. On a crisp autumn morning, The gates of the correctional facility slid open. Ilara stepped out, blinking in the unfamiliar sunlight. The world had moved on. Cars were sleeker, phones were thinner, and Julian Croft was no longer just a CEO. He was a philanthropist, a civic leader, his face adorning the covers of magazines. His crime and her imprisonment had been a footnote, a sad story of a promising young woman who had flown too close to the sun. He had spun her downfall into a cautionary tale about greed, all while basking in the glow of his own. She took a bus to a city where no one knew her name. Using the untraceable cryptocurrency accounts Mouse had helped her set up from the inside, she rented a small, anonymous apartment. The first thing she did was erase Ilara Vance. Legally she was dead. Socially she was a ghost. Anya Sharma was born. A freelance financial consultant with a fabricated but flawless digital history. She was plain, forgettable, the kind of woman who could sit in a coffee shop for hours and not be noticed. This anonymity was her greatest weapon. For 6 months Anya did nothing but watch. She became a scholar of Julian Croft. She read every article, watched every interview, analyzed every quarterly report from his now global empire, Croft Global. She mapped his life. His glass and steel penthouse, his immaculately curated wife, Camilla, his rebellious university-aged son, Leo, and his inner circle of executives. She discovered his routines. The 5 a.m. workout with a personal trainer. The Tuesday lunch with his CFO, David Chen. The Friday gala circuit with Camilla, where they performed their roles as the city's golden couple. She learned his passions. Modern art, rare wines, and above all, his legacy. He wasn't just building a company. He was building a dynasty. That was the first termite the Duchess had taught her to look for. The plan she formulated was not a single, swift strike, but a meticulous, multi-pronged siege. She would dismantle his life piece by piece, starting from the outside and working her way in, until the entire edifice collapsed upon him. She would use the truth as her weapon, for she knew the foundation of his perfect life was built on a bedrock of lies. Phase 1, the foundation of lies. Julian's most prized possession was the Croft Foundation, his philanthropic arm. It was the soap with which he scrubbed his reputation clean, funding hospitals and art galleries. Ilara knew that charity was often the most beautiful mask for greed. Using the skills Mouse had taught her, Ilara, as Anya, began to probe the Foundation's digital security. It was robust, but she wasn't looking for the front door. She was looking for the cracks in the plumbing. After weeks of careful, patient work, she found it. A series of wire transfers to a subsidiary consulting firm in the Cayman Islands. The firm was a shell, and the money being funneled into it was being used not for charity, but to discreetly purchase controlling shares in emerging tech companies, a form of insider trading once removed. She didn't leak it to the authorities. That was too crude, too quick. Instead, she compiled the information into a neat, digestible package, complete with irrefutable evidence. She then researched journalists, finding one named Ben Carter, a young, hungry reporter stuck on the city beat, desperate for a breakout story. From a burner phone, she sent an anonymous, encrypted message. Look into the Croft Foundation's partnership with Ethelred Consulting. Follow the money. 2 weeks later, Carter's article dropped. It was a bombshell. It didn't outright accuse Julian of fraud, but it raised serious, well-documented questions about the Foundation's financial ethics. It was the first crack in the marble facade of St. Julian. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. The media swirled. For the first time in a decade, a shadow of doubt fell upon Julian Croft's name. Ilara watched the news reports from her sterile apartment, a flicker of satisfaction barely registering on her face. The siege had begun. Phase 2. The fractured family. The Duchess had told her, a man's legacy is not in his buildings, but in his bloodline. Julian's son Leo was his designated heir. But from her research, Ilara knew Leo was a pressure point. He was an art student who chafed under his father's iron-fisted expectations. Ilara, as Anya, began to frequent the bohemian cafes and art galleries near Leo's university. She engineered a chance encounter, spilling coffee on him. She was apologetic, unassuming, and crucially, unimpressed by the name Croft. She introduced herself as Anya, a freelance analyst. Over the next month, she became his confidant. He vented his frustrations about his father's suffocating control, his obsession with image over substance. Anya listened, a sympathetic ear, subtly stoking the fires of his rebellion. "It's not about the money," Leo complained one afternoon. "It's that he doesn't see me. He sees a successor. A brand extension. Control can feel like that," Anya said softly. "Sometimes the people who claim to protect us are just building a prettier cage." The time was right for the next push. Ilara had uncovered that Julian was using a complex series of trusts to control Leo's inheritance, manipulating it to force him into a business degree. She anonymously sent Leo the legal documents, not the complex financial statements, but a simple, highlighted summary that even an artist could understand. The proof that his father wasn't just guiding him. He was coercing him financially. The explosion was magnificent. Leo confronted Julian at a major press event for a new hospital wing. The argument, caught on a dozen smartphone cameras, went viral. "My entire life is a lie, a PR campaign for your ego," Leo shouted before storming out. The image of the perfect family shattered in an instant. Julian's carefully constructed legacy now had a vocal, public dissenter from within his own bloodline. The termites were chewing through the support beams. Phase 3, the King's Castle. With his public image tarnished and his family in turmoil, all Julian had left was his company, Croft Global. This was his fortress. To bring it down, Ilara needed a man on the inside. Her target was David Chen, the CFO. David was loyal, but he was also a survivor. Ilara's research showed he was meticulous, cautious, and deeply risk-averse. He had been with Julian for 15 years, but Ilara suspected he was kept around because he was competent but not ambitious enough to be a threat. He was the perfect potential turncoat. Ilara knew Julian's pattern. As the scrutiny from the Foundation scandal intensified, he would be preparing a new scapegoat for any other financial irregularities. He would never let himself be caught. He would need a fall guy. Diving deep into Croft Global's servers, a far more challenging task, she found what she was looking for. A new, sophisticated scheme to hide losses from a failed venture in South America. And just as she had predicted, the digital architecture of the fraud was being built around David Chen's credentials. Julian was framing his most loyal lieutenant. This time the anonymous package was physical. She sent it to David's home address. Inside was a single ledger sheet showing the fraudulent transfers. At the bottom was a handwritten note. He did it to Ilara Vance. "You're next." She included a second encrypted flash drive. On it was the complete, undeniable proof of the scheme, and how it was designed to make David the sole architect. But she also included something else. A pre-written, anonymous whistleblower report to the SEC, and a detailed guide on how to leak the information without being implicated. She gave him a choice: loyalty and prison, or betrayal and freedom. 3 days later, an unprecedented SEC investigation into Croft Global was announced, citing a credible tip from a high-level whistleblower. The company's stock plummeted by 40% in a single day. The financial world was stunned. Julian's fortress was breached. Phase 4. The Ghost in the Machine. The final piece was the most personal. The SEC had the evidence from David, but Ilara wanted to ensure the narrative was undeniable. The final nail had to be one she hammered in herself. She had to resurrect a ghost. Working through the night, fueled by a decade of cold fury, she executed her digital masterpiece. She didn't just leak information. She wove a story in code. She used Julian's personal network, his home computer, a device he thought was impenetrable. She reactivated dormant digital signatures, unearthed buried metadata from the original fraud 10 years ago, and linked it to the new one. She created a pristine, unassailable digital chain of evidence that showed Julian Croft not only orchestrating the current fraud but also directly manipulating the evidence that had convicted Ilara Vance 10 years prior. She didn't plant false evidence. She simply illuminated the truth that had always been there, hidden in the dark corners of the servers. She used his own methods against him, creating a perfect, damning mirror of the crime he had committed against her. She sent the final package to Ben Carter, the journalist. The subject line was simple: The Croft Legacy. The story didn't just break. It detonated. The SEC, armed with David's inside information, now had a clear motive and a decade-long pattern of behavior to follow. Federal agents raided Croft Global and Julian's penthouse on the same morning. The images were on every news channel. Julian Croft, the titan of industry, the philanthropist, being led away in handcuffs. His face not one of sorrow, but of stunned, uncomprehending rage. A week later, Julian was out on a $10 million bail, confined to his penthouse. His wife had left, taking the art with her. His son wasn't speaking to him. His company was in receivership. His name was toxic. His legacy was a smoking crater. The buzzer to his penthouse rang. His security detail, now a pair of bored federal marshals, let the visitor in. It was a woman, plain, dark-haired, with eyes that seemed to hold the cold, patient stillness of a winter lake. Julian didn't recognize her. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "If you're from the press, get out." The woman walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out over the city he had once owned. "You used to call me Ellie," she said, her voice even and calm. Julian froze. He stared at her, at the lines around her eyes, the hardness in her mouth. The ghost of a face he hadn't seen in a decade slowly came into focus. Recognition dawned, followed by utter disbelief. "Vance. Ilara. It can't be. You built your kingdom on a grave, Julian," she said, turning to face him. "Did you really think the dead would stay buried?" "You did this," he whispered, a tremor of fear finally piercing his arrogance. "The journalist. My son. The SEC. It was all you." "No," she corrected him, her voice precise and cutting. "I didn't do this to you. I just held up a mirror. Everything that is happening to you, you authored yourself. The fraud, the betrayal, the lies. I just pulled back the curtain." He sank into a leather armchair, a broken man. "Why? After all this time? Why?" Ilara walked towards him, stopping just a few feet away. There was no rage in her eyes, no triumph. Just an empty, echoing finality. "You took 10 years of my life. You turned my name into a synonym for disgrace. You built your legacy on my ashes. You ask why? Because you needed to understand. Legacy isn't what you build. It's what you leave behind. And your legacy, the real one, is this: a hollow man in an empty room, brought down by the truth you tried to bury." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out of the penthouse, leaving him in the ruins of his life. Stepping out into the city streets, Ilara, no, Anya, not anymore, maybe someone new entirely, felt the immense weight of the last 10 years lift. It wasn't joy she felt, nor was it the sweet thrill of victory. It was the quiet, profound relief of a debt finally paid. Her purpose, the single burning star she had navigated by for a decade, was fulfilled. She looked up at the towering skyscrapers, the endless river of people flowing past her. She was anonymous again, but this time it wasn't a disguise. It was freedom. The future was a blank page, and for the first time since that gavel fell, she was the one holding the pen.